The bustling streets of New York City pulsed with the rhythm of a Monday morning rush. Horns blared, pedestrians hurried along rain-slicked sidewalks, and the towering skyscrapers of Manhattan loomed like silent guardians over the chaos. At the heart of it all stood the gleaming headquarters of Skyline Holdings, a fortress of glass and steel that symbolized power, wealth, and unyielding ambition. But on this particular morning, the air inside the building carried an extra chill, especially on the 41st floor, the staff floor, where the real work happened away from the polished executive suites. Malcolm Jordan stepped out of the elevator, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the linoleum tiles. At 38, he was a man who had built an empire from nothing, a cybersecurity genius whose startup had secured government contracts worth hundreds of millions. Now, as the founder of Orion Capital, he had just finalized a $1.5 billion acquisition of Skyline Holdings. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Malcolm, a black man in casual clothes, no badge in sight. Bryce's face twisted into a mask of disdain, his posture straightening as if to assert his authority. "Hey, this area's for internal staff only," Bryce barked, stepping directly into Malcolm's path. "Delivery guys use the service entrance around back." Malcolm paused, his dark eyes meeting Bryce's without flinching. He adjusted the strap of his bag, his voice calm and measured. "I'm not a delivery guy," Bryce snorted, crossing his arms. "Doesn't matter. People like you don't belong up here. Get out before I call security." The words hung in the air like a slap. Around them, employees peeked over their cubicle walls, some whispering, others pretending to type furiously. A few pulled out their phones, discreetly recording the scene. The tension thickened, the office falling into an uneasy hush. Malcolm could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken judgments, the fear of intervening. He had faced this before in boardrooms and back alleys alike, but it never lost its sting. "You have 5 seconds to leave this floor," Bryce growled, his face reddening as he leaned in closer. Invading Malcolm's space, Malcolm didn't head to the executive floors after the confrontation. Instead, he lingered on the staff level, finding a quiet corner near a row of vending machines where he could blend in. He pulled out his laptop, pretending to work, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the open-plan office like a hawk surveying its territory. The hum of printers and the clack of keyboards provided a mundane soundtrack, but beneath it, Malcolm detected the undercurrents of tension that defined the real Skyline Holdings, the side hidden from glossy annual reports and investor pitches. Throughout the morning, he watched Bryce Langford in action. The manager moved through the cubicles like a predator, his voice booming with false authority. When a young black employee named Jamal submitted a report a few minutes late, Bryce slammed his fist on the desk. "What's this sloppy work again? You're lazy Jamal, always making excuses. Fix it now or don't bother coming in tomorrow." Jamal's shoulders slumped, his eyes downcast as he nodded silently. Malcolm's jaw tightened. He recognized that look, the erosion of self-worth he'd seen in too many faces, including his own during his early days scraping by in a tech world that saw his skin before his code. Minutes later, Bryce turned to a white colleague, Sarah, who had made a similar delay on her own task. His tone shifted instantly warm, almost paternal. "Hey, no worries, Sarah. We all have off days. Great job on that presentation last week. You're a star around here." He clapped her on the shoulder, eliciting a relieved smile. The double standard hung in the air like smoke, unnoticed or ignored by most. Malcolm's fingers hovered over his keyboard, his mind flashing back to his startup years, pitching ideas to venture capitalists who smiled politely but funded white founders with half the vision. He'd clawed his way up, turning rejection into fuel, but scenes like this reminded him why he'd built Orion Capital to rewrite the rules. As the morning wore on, Malcolm's gaze fell on an older black man in a janitor's uniform methodically mopping a spill near the break room. His name tag read, Harris. 3 managers strode past him, their expensive shoes tracking over the wet floor without a glance. One muttered, "Make sure it's spotless board meeting tonight," before continuing their conversation about weekend golf outings. No acknowledgement, no thank you. Harris paused, wiping sweat from his brow, his expression a mask of quiet endurance. Malcolm waited until the hallway cleared before approaching. "Excuse me, sir," he said softly, extending a hand. "Mind if I help with that?" Harris looked up, surprise flickering in his weary eyes. He straightened, glancing around as if expecting a trap. "Young man, you don't have to. But come with me." He led Malcolm to a dimly lit storage room at the end of the hall, closing the door with a soft click. The space smelled of cleaning supplies and dust shelves stacked with forgotten files. "My son used to work here." Harris began, his voice low and gravelly, laced with a pain the time hadn't dulled. "Smart kid, quicker than anyone in his department. But his skin was too dark for them. He asked questions, why he got reprimanded more, why promotions skipped him. Bryce labeled him unstable, too emotional. HR rubber-stamped it. No one fought for him." Harris's hands trembled as he gripped a mop handle. "He couldn't find another job. The stigma stuck. Last spring, he couldn't take it anymore." Malcolm felt a knot form in his throat. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his own memories surfacing, losing his first big contract because a client didn't feel comfortable with him leading the team. Harris studied him. "When I saw Bryce shove you out earlier, I knew you weren't just passing through. You're here for something bigger." Malcolm nodded, his voice steady. "I am. I've faced the same walls, built my company despite them. Now I'm buying this one to tear those walls down." Harris's eyes widened with realization. "You're the investor, the one everyone's whispering about." "Yes," Malcolm confirmed. "And I won't let this place stay like it is, Mr. Harris. Not anymore." By 11:45 a.m., the executive boardroom on the 45th floor exuded an air of polished opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting prismatic light across the long mahogany table that gleamed under layers of wax. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan's skyline, a reminder of the empire Skyline Holdings had built. The room filled gradually with the company's top brass men and women in tailored suits, their wrists adorned with Swiss watches that ticked away fortunes. Richard Huxley, the silver-haired chairman, sat at the head, adjusting his cufflinks as he addressed the group. "We have just minutes before our anonymous investor arrives," Richard said, his voice steady but laced with anticipation. "This is the biggest deal in our history, a $1.5 billion acquisition. I expect everyone to show the utmost respect. No slip-ups." Nods rippled around the table. Bryce Langford lounged in his seat, a smug grin playing on his lips as he leaned toward a colleague. "Don't tell me it's some old codger in a Bahamas villa," he quipped, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Definitely not that black guy from downstairs this morning." A few chuckles escaped from the group, though. One female director, Elena Ramirez, shot him a disapproving glance and shook her head subtly. The laughter died, quickly replaced by the rustle of papers and the soft ping of incoming emails. The clock struck noon. The heavy oak door swung open with the deliberate creak. All eyes turned, expecting an entourage of lawyers or a stern-faced financier. Instead, Malcolm Jordan entered alone. He had changed since the morning his casual polo replaced by a sharp black suit that hugged his broad shoulders, a crisp white shirt open at the collar exuding quiet authority. No briefcase, no assistants, just him striding in with the confidence of someone who owned the room because in a few signatures he would. The boardroom fell into stunned silence. Chairs scraped as people shifted uncomfortably. Bryce's face drained of color, his earlier smirk vanishing like smoke. He gripped the table edge, his knuckles whitening. Richard bolted upright, his chair nearly toppling. You're... Malcolm met his gaze evenly and nodded once. Malcolm Jordan, chairman of Orion Capital, the entity acquiring Skyline Holdings for $1.5 billion. He pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table and sat his presence, commanding the space without a word. The air grew thick, charged with unspoken panic. Whispers erupted in hushed tones. "That's him! The guy from the video! How is this possible?" Bryce stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. This has to be a mistake." He glanced around for support, but no one met his eyes. Elena folded her arms, her expression unreadable. Richard cleared his throat, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Jordan, welcome. We weren't expecting... Well, this is quite the surprise. Please, let's proceed." Malcolm leaned back, his fingers steepled. His eyes swept the room, lingering on each face before settling on Bryce, who shrank under the scrutiny. "Before we sign anything," Malcolm said, his voice deep and resonant, "I'd like to discuss your company culture. From what I've seen, it's enlightening." The whispers ceased. Richard blinked. "Our culture. We've built a reputation for excellence, innovation." "Excellence for some," Malcolm interrupted smoothly. "I've spent the morning on your staff floor, observing." He paused, letting the words sink in. Bryce's face twisted in horror as realization dawned. "I saw how certain employees are treated. The reprimands, the dismissals, the casual disregard, all while others get pats on the back for the same work." Richard shifted uneasily. "Mr. Jordan, if there was any misunderstanding..." "No misunderstanding," Malcolm replied, his tone unwavering. "I was escorted out of my own future building because of how I look. And that's just the tip." He glanced at Bryce again, who avoided his gaze, sweat beading on his forehead. The room felt smaller, the panoramic view outside, mocking the confined tension within. Elena leaned forward slightly, her interest piqued, while others fidgeted with pens or stared at their notes. Malcolm's expression remained composed, but his eyes burned with purpose. "We should start," he said finally, his voice carrying an undercurrent of finality that hinted at the storm about to break. The board members exchanged nervous glances, the weight of unspoken consequences pressing down like the city's skyline outside. Malcolm reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small remote, clicking it with deliberate calm. The large screen at the far end of the boardroom flickered to life, casting a blue glow over the stunned faces around the table. The video began without preamble, grainy footage from the staff floor hallway showing Bryce blocking Malcolm's path, his voice echoing through the speakers. "People like you don't belong up here." The room's earlier whispers turned to gasps. Elena covered her mouth while Richard's face paled, his hands clenching the armrests of his chair. The clip transitioned to an audio recording captured discreetly earlier that morning. Bryce's voice filled the space. "You don't have what it takes for leadership, but you have a nice smile. Keep that up." It was the conversation with the Latina intern, her hesitant laugh underscoring the discomfort. The board members shifted uneasily. One man loosened his tie, another stared at the table as if it held the answers. Bryce sat frozen, His earlier bravado, shattered sweat now visibly trickling down his temple. Malcolm let the silence stretch his eyes, scanning the room like a judge surveying a courtroom. "Before we proceed with the signing," he said, his voice steady and resonant, "I want to share why I chose Skyline Holdings not for its balance sheets or market share, but to expose and dismantle what's rotting it from within." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "This morning I was escorted out of the building I'm about to own, not because of any threat or policy violation, but because of this." He gestured to his face, his skin. "Because of assumptions rooted in prejudice. And it's not isolated, it's systemic." Richard leaned forward, attempting to regain control. "Mr. Jordan, this is highly irregular. If there's been a misunderstanding with Mr. Langford—" "Misunderstanding," Malcolm echoed, his tone sharpening. "I've spent hours observing your culture. Reprimands for employees of color over minor issues while others get praise for the same. Casual dismissals, microaggressions that erode dignity. Your HR processes rubber stamp it all and no one speaks up." He turned to Bryce, who finally found his voice, jumping to his feet. "This is entrapment!" Bryce shouted, his face flushed. "I didn't know who you were! How was I supposed to—" "That's precisely the point!" Malcolm cut in, his gaze unyielding. "You didn't know, so you defaulted to contempt, based on what my appearance, my lack of a suit. That's not leadership, that's bigotry. And if you had known, would you have acted differently? That's hypocrisy, not integrity." Bryce opened his mouth to retort, but Malcolm raised a hand, silencing him. "You've cost this company talent, morale, and lives. I spoke with Mr. Harris downstairs. His son, brilliant, dedicated, was driven out because he dared question the inequities, labeled unstable. He didn't survive the fallout." The room recoiled. Elena's eyes welled with tears. Another director murmured, "We had no idea." Richard rubbed his forehead, the facade of control cracking. "Mr. Jordan, we can investigate disciplinary actions." "Too late for that," Malcolm replied. "I've already signed the interim CEO appointment papers." He nodded toward the door, which opened on cue. "Mr." Harris entered, his janitor's uniform replaced by a simple blazer and slacks, his posture straight, despite the years of toil etched into his features. The board stared in disbelief as he took a seat beside Malcolm. "Mr. Harris will oversee the personnel overhaul for the next 60 days, Malcolm announced. "He's seen the company's underbelly, the real one, not the polished version you present. He knows the difference between a job and human value. Under his guidance, we'll audit every department, implement bias training, and ensure accountability starts at the top." Bryce exploded. "You can't do this. You don't understand how to run a company like this." Malcolm stood towering over the table. "I don't need to understand how you run it. I'm here to run it right." The declaration hung in the air, the boardroom's opulence now feeling like a cage. As papers were passed for signatures, the shift was palpable. A reckoning had begun, and no one could look away. 3 months later, the transformation at the former Skyline Holdings was unmistakable. The company had been rebranded as Equity Core Technologies, a name Malcolm had chosen to embody its new core principle: fairness in every fiber of its operations. The once sterile staff floor on level 41 had been renovated into an open collaboration space with communal tables, diverse artwork on the walls, and breakout rooms designed for honest dialogue. Gone were the rigid hierarchies. In their place, policies that promoted inclusion, mandatory bias training, anonymous reporting channels, and promotion pathways based on merit, not connections or appearances. Employees from all backgrounds, Black, Latino, Asian, white now shared ideas freely, their voices amplified in town halls, where even janitors could speak up without fear. Bryce Langford had vanished from the financial world like a bad dream. Malcolm nodded, clapping him on the shoulder. "You've earned it. We're building something real here." The pinnacle of the overhaul came at a scholarship ceremony in a sunlit auditorium downtown. Equity Corps had launched a fund for underrepresented students in tech, awarding grants to dozens of young talents. Malcolm stood at the podium, the room packed with recipients, their families, and company staff. "I wasn't the only one discriminated against," he said, his voice carrying through the speakers with quiet strength. "But I had the platform to end it, at least in my corner of the world. And if I didn't act, who would?" The audience hung on his words, applause building, as he stepped down. His eyes scanned the crowd, landing on a group of students in the front row. Among them was a young man with a frayed backpack, his gaze fierce and determined, mirroring Malcolm's own fire from 2 decades ago. The boy approached afterward, shaking Malcolm's hand. "Your story, it gives me hope," he said. Malcolm smiled. "Hope is just the start. Take it and build." As the event wrapped, Malcolm walked through the city streets, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot. He thought of his journey from bootstrapping a startup in a cramped apartment to reshaping a corporate giant. Change didn't come from capes or corner offices, he realized. It started with seeing the unseen, challenging the silence, and treating people not as roles or colors, but as equals. Equity Corps wasn't perfect yet, but it was a start. And in a world quick to judge, that was the real victory.